The night it all began. I run a small auto repair shop in Buffalo. Or, I should say, I used to run one. The winters here are brutal, and business wasn't exactly booming. My shop was barely holding on by a thread. I'd sunk everything into it, my savings, my time, my sanity, but I just couldn't catch a break. Thanksgiving that year felt like just another reminder of how stuck I was. My plan was simple: heat up a frozen turkey dinner, drink a couple of beers, and crash early. No family to spend it with, no big meal to look forward to. Just me, the shop, and a fading dream. But then, just as I was locking up for the night, a beat-up minivan sputtered into the parking lot. Out stepped a man, his wife, and two kids bundled up like marshmallows in their winter coats. The guy looked desperate. His name was Mike, and he explained that they'd been driving up from Ohio to visit family when their van started making this god-awful noise. They'd been stranded for hours, trying to find help. Every shop was closed for the holiday, and mine was their last hope. I stood there, freezing my ass off in the icy wind, listening to him ramble. Honestly, my first thought wasn't, "Wow, how can I help this family in need?" It was more like, "Great. Just what I need, a guilt trip on Thanksgiving." Mike's story hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. Maybe it was the way his little girl peeked out from behind his leg, clutching a stuffed bear like it was her lifeline. Or maybe it was the look on his wife's face, exhausted but trying to stay strong. I could tell they were on edge, cold, and out of options. Still, I hesitated. The truth is, I was burned out. Business was slow, and I was running out of money and motivation. I'd been fixing cars for years, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep the shop open. Part of me wanted to just say, "Sorry, can't help you. Try calling a tow truck." But there was this nagging voice in my head, probably my mom's, to be honest, telling me I'd regret it if I turned them away. I sighed, shoving my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. "All right," I said. "Pull it into the bay. Let me take a look." Mike's face lit up like I just handed him the winning lottery ticket. He and his wife kept thanking me, and the kids were bouncing around like they'd just been told Santa was coming early. I didn't have the heart to tell them I wasn't making any promises. As they climbed back into the van, I trudged into the shop, flipping the lights back on. The place smelled like motor oil and regret, a fitting combo for how I felt about my life at that moment. I grabbed my tools, pulled on my gloves, and prepared myself for what I figured would be a long, thankless night. But little did I know, fixing that van would be the least of my surprises. The van wheezed and groaned like it was on its last leg as Mike carefully drove it into the bay. The thing was a mess, rust eating away at the wheel wells, a cracked side mirror held together with duct tape, and a bumper that looked like it had been through a demolition derby. I muttered under my breath, "Why do people wait until their cars are practically falling apart before they get them checked?" I popped the hood, and it didn't take long to find the culprit. The serpentine belt was shredded, hanging on by a thread, and one of the pulleys was jammed. I explained the issue to Mike, keeping it simple. "You're lucky you made it this far. This belt goes, and you're dead in the water." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't understand half of what I was saying. "Can you fix it?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope and worry. "Yeah, but it's not a quick job. And I don't have the exact belt you need in stock. Closest place to get one is the parts warehouse across town, and they're closed till tomorrow." Mike's face fell, and his wife let out a quiet sigh. I could see her trying to comfort the kids, who were now huddled together in the back seat. Something about the whole scene got to me. Maybe it was the thought of those kids spending Thanksgiving in a freezing van. Or maybe I just wanted to feel useful for once, like I was doing something that actually mattered. "Tell you what," I said, pulling off my gloves. "I've got a spare belt in the back that might fit. It's not perfect, but it'll get you to your destination. Give me a couple of hours, and I'll see what I can do." Mike's relief was palpable. He offered to pay me extra for the trouble, but I waved him off. "Let's just get you back on the road first," I said. As I got to work, they all huddled in the small waiting area, sipping hot cocoa from the vending machine. I could hear the kids laughing softly, their voices breaking through the hum of the shop heater. It was oddly comforting, like a little reminder that not everything in life is about dollars and cents. But as I tightened the last bolt and wiped the grease from my hands, I had no idea that fixing their van was about to set off a chain of events that would flip my world upside down. I had just finished replacing the belt and was double-checking everything when I heard the shop door creak open. I turned around, expecting to see Mike, but instead, a man in a heavy coat and a knit hat walked in. He wasn't with the family, I could tell right away. He had this intense look about him, like he wasn't here to make small talk. "Are you James Carter?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded, trying to place him. He didn't look familiar, and Buffalo isn't exactly a town where strangers just pop in. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" He stepped closer, glancing at the van. "I heard you're the guy who helped Mike out tonight. That true?" I frowned, feeling a little uneasy. "Yeah. What's it to you?" The man gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's just say I've been looking for someone like you. Someone willing to go out of their way for a stranger." I didn't know what to make of it. The guy had this air of authority, like he was used to being in control, but he wasn't giving me any context. My instincts told me to keep my guard up. "Look, I don't know what you're getting at, but I've got work to finish here," I said, gesturing toward the van. "Relax," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to see for myself if the stories were true." "Stories?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "Mike's not just some guy with car trouble," the man said, his tone shifting. "He's part of something bigger. And now, so are you." I stared at him, completely baffled. "What the hell are you talking about?" Before he could answer, Mike walked in, his face pale. He saw the man and froze. "Greg," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Greg. That was his name. And judging by the look on Mike's face, this wasn't a happy reunion. Something was going on, and I had a sinking feeling I'd just stepped into the middle of it. The air in the shop felt like it dropped 10 degrees as Mike and Greg stared each other down. I glanced between them, trying to piece together what was happening. Mike looked like he'd seen a ghost, and Greg's expression was unreadable, calm, but with this undercurrent of something darker. "Mike," Greg said evenly, "you didn't think I'd let you disappear without a trace, did you?" "Greg, Mike stammered, stepping protectively in front of his wife and kids, who had wandered over from the waiting area. "This isn't what it looks like. We're just trying to get to my in-laws' place for Thanksgiving. That's all." Greg tilted his head, like he didn't believe a word of it. "Sure. A broken-down van on Thanksgiving night? Convenient timing." "All right, hold up," I said, stepping between them. "I don't know what's going on here, but this is my shop, and I don't need drama." Mike came in with a busted van. "I'm fixing it." "That's it. If you've got some beef with him, take it somewhere else." Greg's eyes flicked to me, and for a moment, I felt like I was under a microscope. "You don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" he said, almost amused. "No," I shot back, "and I don't care. Now, unless you're here to pay for repairs, you can see yourself out." Greg smirked, but he didn't move. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're in over your head." "Greg, please," Mike cut in, his voice pleading. "Leave James out of this. He's just a mechanic. He doesn't know anything." Greg's smile faded, and he turned back to Mike. "That's where you're wrong. He's involved now, whether he likes it or not." My stomach twisted. Involved in what? What the hell had I just walked into? Mike's wife, Sarah, stepped forward, clutching her kid's hands. "Greg, don't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "The kids don't need to see this. Let us go. Please." For a moment, Greg hesitated, his eyes softening as he looked at the kids. Then he sighed and pulled out a card from his coat pocket, handing it to me. "When they're gone," he said, "call me. You'll want to hear what I have to say." And just like that, he walked out, leaving the shop in stunned silence. I looked at Mike, who was pale as a sheet. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "You want to tell me what the hell that was about?" Mike swallowed hard, glancing at his wife. "It's complicated," he said. "Uncomplicated," I snapped. "Because now I'm in the middle of something I didn't sign up for, and I'm not exactly thrilled about it." Mike looked like he was about to say something, but Sarah cut him off. "Not here," she said firmly. "Not in front of the kids." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Whatever was going on, it was clear this was bigger than a busted van. And whether I liked it or not, I wasn't getting out of this mess anytime soon. After Greg left, the shop was dead silent except for the hum of the heater. Mike and Sarah exchanged a look, and I could tell they were debating how much to tell me. Their kids were huddled on the waiting room chairs, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. "Look," I said, leaning against my workbench, "I'm not trying to pry, but if this guy's going to keep showing up, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Who is he? And what does he want with you?" Mike let out a long breath and sank into a nearby chair, his hands running through his hair. "Greg works for someone I used to work for," he said, his voice low. "Let's just say it wasn't exactly a legal operation." I frowned. "What kind of operation?" Mike hesitated, glancing at Sarah. She gave him a small nod, and he continued. "I used to move products. High-value stuff. No questions asked. It paid well, and at the time, I thought it was worth the risk. But then things got messy. I saw what they were really into, money laundering, trafficking, you name it. I wanted out, but you don't just walk away from people like that." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "So, you ran," I said. "Yeah," Mike admitted. "We've been laying low for months, trying to stay off their radar. But Greg's been tracking us. He's not here to bring us back, he's here to send a message." "A message to who?" "To anyone else who might think about leaving," Sarah said softly. The weight of their situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just some family road trip gone wrong. These people were running for their lives. And now, thanks to my bleeding heart, I was smack in the middle of it. "You should have told me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I wouldn't have gotten involved if I'd known. We didn't want to drag you into it." Mike interrupted. "We just needed to get to Sarah's parents' place and figure out our next move. We didn't think Greg would find us this fast." I shook my head, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through my mind. "So what now? Do you even have a plan?" Mike looked at Sarah, then back at me. "We'll leave tonight. As soon as the van's ready, we'll be gone. Greg won't bother you again." I wanted to believe him, but something about Greg's parting words made me doubt that this would be the end of it. As much as I wanted to wash my hands of the whole situation, I couldn't shake the feeling that walking away wasn't an option anymore. "Fine," I said finally. "But if he comes back, I'm calling the cops." Mike nodded, and Sarah gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." I nodded, but inside, I wasn't so sure I deserved her thanks. I had a sinking feeling that fixing their van was only the beginning of my involvement in their mess. By the time I finished tightening the last bolt and testing the van, it was nearly midnight. The shop was quiet except for the occasional pop of the heater, and the temperature outside had plummeted. Mike and Sarah gathered their kids and their things, moving quickly, like they were trying to outrun a shadow. "All right," I said, handing Mike the keys. "The van should hold up, but you'll want to get that pulley replaced properly as soon as you can. Drive carefully, it's not a permanent fix. Mike took the keys with a shaky hand, his face a mix of relief and guilt. James, I don't know how to thank you, he said. You don't have to, I replied, though my tone was sharper than I intended. Just get where you're going and stay out of trouble. Sarah stepped forward, her voice softer. We're sorry for dragging you into this. You didn't have to help us, but you did. We won't forget that. The kids, half asleep and bundled in coats, waved goodbye as they climbed into the van. I watched as Mike started the engine, the hum of the motor sounding steady for the first time that night. They pulled out of the bay, and for a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But just as they reached the edge of the lot, I noticed something, a black SUV parked across the street, its engine idling. The windows were tinted, but the shape of a figure in the driver's seat was unmistakable. Damn it, I muttered under my breath. I jogged toward the van, waving my arms to get Mike's attention. He rolled down the window, confusion written all over his face. Don't go that way, I said, my voice low and urgent. There's a car across the street. Someone's watching. Mike's face went pale. Greg, he whispered. Probably, I said. Take the back road behind the shop. It's not paved, but it'll get you to the highway without being seen. Mike nodded, his grip tightening on the wheel. Thank you, he said again, his voice barely audible. Without another word, he backed up and turned toward the narrow dirt road behind my shop. I stood there in the freezing cold, watching their taillights disappear into the night. The SUV didn't move, but I could feel its presence like a weight pressing on my chest. When I finally turned back toward the shop, I saw something on the ground where the van had been parked, a folded piece of paper. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly, and unfolded it. Inside was a single line of text, "You can't save everyone, James." My heart sank. Greg wasn't just after Mike. He was playing a bigger game, and I had just been pulled in as a pawn. I stood there in the cold, staring at the note, my breath coming out in sharp, visible puffs. The words felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Mike and his family anymore, Greg was sending a message, and it was meant for me. I walked back into the shop, locking the door behind me and flipping off the lights. The place suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a target. My stomach churned as I tried to figure out what to do next. I sat down at my desk, the folded note still in my hand, and stared at the card Greg had given me earlier. His name and a phone number were printed on it in bold, no-nonsense lettering. No company name, no title, just Greg and the digits. Calling him felt like the last thing I wanted to do, but what choice did I have? If I ignored him, would he show up again? Would he make good on whatever threat was hidden in that cryptic note? I hesitated for what felt like an eternity before finally picking up my phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I was about to dial when I heard a knock at the door. My heart nearly stopped. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was way too late for a friendly visit. I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy wrench, and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me," came a familiar voice. I peeked through the window and saw Sarah standing there, bundled in her coat. She looked frantic, her breath fogging up the glass. I opened the door, wrench still in hand. "What are you doing here? Where's Mike?" "They're at a gas station down the road," she said quickly. I told him I needed to use the restroom, but I had to come back. "There's something you need to know." "What?" I asked, stepping aside to let her in. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping into the shop. "Greg isn't just after us. He's after you now, too." "Yeah, I figured that out," I said, holding up the note. "Care to explain why?" Sarah looked down, wringing her hands. "Because you helped us. Greg sees that as a betrayal. He doesn't trust outsiders, and now he thinks you're working with us. You're part of this whether you like it or not. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. So, what am I supposed to do? Run? Hide? She shook her head. No. Running won't help. The only way out is to make him believe you're not a threat. And how the hell am I supposed to do that? I snapped. She hesitated, then said, call him. Meet with him. Hear him out. If he thinks you're willing to cooperate, he might leave you alone. The thought of sitting down with Greg made my skin crawl, but what choice did I have? I nodded reluctantly. Fine. I'll call him. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with both gratitude and guilt. I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted this to happen. Neither did I muttered, picking up the phone. As I dialed the number on Greg's card, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger, and much worse. The phone rang twice before Greg picked up. His voice was calm, almost casual, like he'd been expecting my call. James, he said. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. What do you want? Straight to the point. I like that, Greg said. It's simple. I need to know where Mike and his family are headed. You tell me, and we can forget all about tonight. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. I don't know where they're going, I lied. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Greg chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. I figured you'd say that. You're a stubborn guy, James. But let me give you some advice, stubbornness can get you hurt. Or worse. My grip on the phone tightened. Is that a threat? No, Greg replied, his tone still infuriatingly calm. It's a reality check. You've got a nice little life here, your shop, your reputation, your freedom. Do you really want to throw it all away for a family you just met? His words hit a nerve, but I refused to let him see it. If you think you can scare me into turning on them, you're wasting your time. Greg was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had a sharper edge. You've got guts, James. I'll give you that. But guts only get you so far. Here's the deal, meet me tomorrow morning at Pine Grove Park, 8 a.m. We'll talk, face to face. You show up, and maybe we can work something out. You don't, and I'll take that as a sign you're not interested in keeping this civil. Before I could respond, he hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone like it might explode. Sarah was watching me, her face pale. What did he say? He wants me to meet him, I said, my voice flat. Tomorrow morning. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. You can't. It's a trap. Maybe, I said, setting the phone down. But if I don't go, he'll just keep coming. And I can't live my life looking over my shoulder. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she said, be careful, James. Greg doesn't play fair. Yeah, I got that impression, I muttered. As she left to rejoin her family, I locked the door behind her and sat down at my desk. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to handle this. Greg was right about one thing, my life wasn't worth much if I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went over every possible scenario in my head, trying to prepare for whatever was waiting for me at Pine Grove Park. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just fixing someone else's problems. I was fighting for my own survival. I pulled into Pine Grove Park at 7:45 a.m., the winter sun barely peeking over the horizon. The place was deserted, just rows of barren trees and a thin layer of frost covering the picnic tables. My breath fogged up the windshield as I sat in my truck, watching and waiting. At exactly 8 a.m., Greg arrived in the same black SUV I'd seen the night before. He parked a few spots away from me, stepped out, and stood by the vehicle, his hands in his coat pockets. He didn't look rushed or nervous. If anything, he seemed like he was in complete control. I got out of the truck, my heart pounding. The wrench I'd stashed under my seat felt heavy in my coat pocket, but I prayed I wouldn't need it. "James," Greg said with a nod as I approached. "I'm glad you came. Let's get this over with," I said, crossing my arms to keep from fidgeting. Greg gestured to a nearby picnic table. "Let's sit." I hesitated but followed him, keeping a safe distance. As we sat down, I couldn't help but notice how calm he was, like he'd already won. "You're in a tough spot," Greg began, leaning forward slightly. "I get it. You're a good guy, loyal, hardworking. You saw a family in trouble, and you helped them. Admirable, really." I said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But here's the problem," he continued. "By helping Mike, you've put yourself on my radar. And trust me, James, that's not where you want to be." I clenched my jaw. I didn't know who they were or what they were running from. I was just fixing a car. "And now you know," Greg said, his voice firm. "Which means you have a choice to make. You can walk away from this, pretend you never met them, and go back to your quiet little life. Or you can keep playing hero and see how far that gets you." I leaned back, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "What happens if I walk away?" Greg smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You keep your shop. Your life stays intact. Mike and his family, they're not your problem anymore. I get what I need from them, and this whole thing blows over. And if I don't?" His smile faded. "Then you become my problem. And trust me, James, you don't want that." The weight of his words hung in the air, but I couldn't shake the image of Mike's kids waving goodbye, their faces full of hope. I thought about Sarah's quiet desperation, about the fear in Mike's eyes when Greg showed up at the shop. "I can't do that," I said finally. Greg's expression darkened. "Think carefully, James. This isn't a fight you can win." "Maybe not," I said, standing up. "But I'm not the kind of guy who turns his back on people who need help. So, do what you have to do. I'm not going to help you hurt them." Greg stood as well, his jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, turning back toward my truck. "But it's my mistake to make." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Greg was still standing there, watching me, his face unreadable. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next few hours driving around, trying to shake the tension that had settled in my chest. My mind kept replaying that meeting, Greg's cold words echoing in my head. I knew I'd made the right decision, but there was a part of me that kept asking if I'd made a mistake. What if Greg was serious? What if he really could make my life hell? By the time I pulled back into the shop, the weight of the morning had started to settle in. I wasn't just worried about myself anymore, I was worried about Mike, Sarah, and their kids. They were out there somewhere, probably scared, and I had no idea what kind of danger they were in now. I didn't even make it inside the shop before my phone buzzed. I checked it, my heart sinking when I saw the name on the screen. It was Sarah. I picked up immediately. "Sarah? What's going on? Is everything okay?" "James, we need your help," she said, her voice shaking. "Greg, he's here. He's at the gas station near the highway. He's asking questions. We think he's on to us." My stomach dropped. "Shit. Where are you?" "We're heading north, trying to get out of town," she said. "But I don't know how much longer we can keep running." I slammed the truck door behind me and started the engine. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." As I sped down the road, I couldn't stop thinking about the gravity of the situation. Greg had already warned me about the consequences of helping Mike and his family. Now, I had to face the reality that my decision was putting all of us in danger. When I reached the gas station, I saw their van parked near the pumps, with Mike and Sarah standing by it. Their kids were inside, the windows fogged up from the cold. Mike looked up as I pulled in, his face tense, but there was a flicker of relief when he saw me. "James, thank God," Mike said, walking over to the truck. "We thought we were done for." "Greg's not far behind, is he?" I asked, scanning the area. Mike nodded. He was asking around. "We can't stay here long. We need to move." I took a deep breath, trying to think quickly. "All right, here's the plan. I'll lead you out of town. We'll take the back roads, avoid the highway. If Greg's looking for you, we don't want to give him any obvious clues." "Thanks," Sarah said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "We don't know what we'd do without you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, running through every possible outcome. The only thing I knew for sure was that we couldn't outrun Greg forever. Sooner or later, he'd catch up to us. And when he did, I wasn't sure what would happen to any of us. I got back in my truck, and we took off, the tires crunching on the frozen road as we headed north. Every turn felt like a gamble, but we kept moving, not knowing where we'd end up or what kind of danger was waiting around the next bend. All I could do was hope that whatever happened next, we'd be ready for it. We had been driving for about an hour, weaving through back roads and side streets, when the first sign of trouble showed up. I was in the lead, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror, when I noticed headlights creeping up behind us. At first, I thought it was just another car, but the headlights were too bright, too steady, too close. I swerved slightly to the right, trying to make sure Mike and Sarah saw what I saw in time. The van followed suit, its headlights flashing back at me. I wasn't sure if it was Greg or just someone else out on these lonely roads, but my gut told me this was no coincidence. I hit the gas. The truck roared forward, tires screeching against the frozen pavement. I glanced back to see the SUV behind us, maintaining its distance but not giving up. It was close enough to make me nervous, and I knew we couldn't keep this up for long. I radioed Mike through the walkie-talkie I'd kept in the truck, trying to keep my voice steady. "Keep up, Mike. Don't lose me." "Got it," Mike's voice crackled back. "We're right behind you." But I could hear the tension in his voice. I could feel it, too. I turned onto a narrower road, hoping it would slow the SUV down. The snow had started to fall harder now, covering the tracks behind us. But as I pushed the truck harder, I saw the headlights of the SUV darting through the haze of falling snow. They weren't backing off. "Shit," I muttered under my breath, taking another sharp turn. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my heart was pounding. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up, especially with the road getting more treacherous by the minute. Another look in the rearview mirror confirmed my fears. The SUV was still right on us, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. I tried to think fast. If Greg wanted to catch us, he'd probably been expecting this kind of move. He knew the area well enough to know there were only so many roads we could take before we hit a dead end. The longer we kept running, the more likely it was he'd find a way to trap us. "Mike," I said, my voice urgent, "take the next left. There's an old warehouse on the corner. We can hide there." "Got it. We'll follow you." I pushed the truck harder, heart racing as I slammed down on the accelerator. The van was close behind, and I could see Mike's headlights reflecting off the trees, just a few seconds away. I didn't even wait for the turn, I made it as soon as I saw the road ahead. The tires squealed as I swung the truck around the corner and onto the old gravel path that led to the warehouse. I barely made it around without losing control, and I heard the crunch of gravel behind me as Mike and Sarah followed closely. We skidded into the abandoned lot and quickly turned off our lights. The snow was falling so thick now that I could barely see the outline of the warehouse, but the heavy walls seemed like the best hiding place we had. We parked the trucks as close to the building as we could, hoping the snow would cover our tracks. I turned off the engine and got out, my breath visible in the frigid air. "We need to wait here for a bit," I said to Mike and Sarah, my voice low. "We can't outrun him forever, but we need to think about our next move." Mike looked around, his face pale in the moonlight. "You think he'll come here?" "I don't know," I said. "But we can't take any chances. We need to stay quiet, stay out of sight. If he's close, he'll probably try to find us." The kids were asleep in the van, unaware of the danger just a few feet away. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with worry. "What do we do now?" I exhaled slowly, trying to think through the panic rising in my chest. We were running out of options. If Greg was following us, he wouldn't stop until he found us, and I didn't know if we could keep running. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we'll figure something out. We have to." As the minutes passed, the cold settled into my bones. I kept my eyes trained on the road, listening for any sound that might signal Greg's arrival. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind made me jump. I had no idea how much time we had before he caught up, but I was certain of one thing: this wasn't over. And it wasn't going to end quietly. Hours passed in the cold silence of the warehouse lot. We didn't dare make a sound, and the kids stayed asleep in the van, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. My hands were numb, my breath shallow, and I kept replaying the events in my mind. We were running out of time, out of places to hide, and the longer we waited, the more likely it was that Greg would find us. I was trying to think of something, anything, when a noise in the distance made me freeze. It was faint, but it was unmistakable, the rumble of an engine. My heart leapt into my throat. "He's here," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Mike and Sarah looked at me, fear in their eyes. "Get in the van. Now," I ordered, my voice firm. "Stay down. Don't move unless I say so." We all scrambled into the van as quickly and quietly as possible, trying not to make a sound. The engine of Greg's SUV grew louder, closer, until I could see its headlights cutting through the snow in the distance. I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't notice our vehicles parked just out of sight. The SUV came into view, slowing down as it approached the warehouse. I could feel my pulse in my throat, every beat thudding louder than the engine. Greg's vehicle stopped just a few yards from where we were hiding, and I saw him step out, looking around cautiously. For a moment, I thought he was going to spot us. But then, something strange happened. Greg paused, scanning the area as if he was deciding where to go next. He seemed to hesitate, as if the risk of pushing further into the cold night was too much for him. Then, without a word, he turned back to his vehicle and got in. The engine roared to life, and he drove off, disappearing into the thickening snowstorm. I sat there for a few moments, not daring to move, until the sound of his SUV faded completely. Only then did I exhale a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. "It's over," Sarah whispered, barely audible. "Not yet," I muttered, but I couldn't deny the sense of relief that washed over me. Greg had given up, for now. We stayed in the van for another half hour, not wanting to take any chances. When I finally pulled the van out of the lot and onto the road, the feeling of being free again was almost surreal. We didn't go back to the shop. I knew better than to go back to the place where Greg had already found me once. Instead, we kept moving, heading south. We found a small motel a few hours away, far enough from Buffalo that we felt safe for the moment. We got a room and settled in, Mike and Sarah taking a few minutes to call family and let them know they were okay. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window into the dark night. Everything felt different now, like a weight had been lifted, but something darker was still lingering in the back of my mind. I knew this wasn't the end of it. But as I looked at Mike, Sarah, and the kids finally able to relax, I realized something. I hadn't just made the right decision by helping them, I'd made a choice to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And sometimes, that's all we can do. We don't always know where the road will lead, but we walk it anyway. We face the danger, the fear, and the unknown because it's the only way to keep moving forward. So, what did I learn from all this? Life doesn't give you guarantees. There's no promise that doing the right thing will work out in your favor. But when it comes down to it, the only thing you can control is your own actions. And that's the one thing that matters. So, if you're ever in a position like mine, where you have to choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right, choose the right thing. Even when it feels like everything is stacked against you. Because you might just find that, in the end, the right choice is the one that leads you to a better life.